This was the week where Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, this is like my read of the week, my favorite read, said in an interview in the New Republic, I believe, the American Prospect. God, I keep on getting this one wrong. Hang on.
Intelligencer.
Oh, fuck. Here we go. I've cut it off now. Now I don't know what it is. I think it's the American Prospect. Basically, Sheldon Whitehouse, senator from Rhode Island, says that Biden isn't holding Trump accountable and that he's concerned. And he couches this in the fact that after the Bush administration got out of power, Obama really didn't hold any of the Bush officials accountable for their crimes, specifically when it came to invading two countries, one on false pretenses or both on false pretenses, honestly, and didn't do enough to kind of like hold them accountable. He writes that I operate off the proposition that if Obama had not been, we're not going to look back, we're only going to look forward, the Trumpsters would have been a lot less bold about doing the reckless damage that they did. I think they took from that lesson that they're safe from scrutiny and that they're safe from consequences, and they can really put the pedal to the metal trying to wreck these agencies of government and corrupt them, because if the worst case scenario happens and the Democrats win, you get tossed out. Then you get a reprieve. It's amnesty for all and there's no consequence to it. So why not be as corrupting as you can if there's never going to be any consequence? And this is someone who's led a charge for an investigation into Trump's Department of Justice. So like a committee hearing, sort of a committee convening, I guess he's asking for, to look back and see, what did William Barr do for Trump? Was any of that legal? And this is just one of the many. Was any of it legal? Was profiteering from your position legal? Was making, officials of the White House stay in Mar-a-Lago retreats and hotels abroad? Was any of that legal? Not White House officials, I think, like military personnel, right? Was sicking a mob on lawmakers on January 6th legal? Was calling the Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, and asking him to find you 8,000 ballots or wherever the fuck he needed? Was any of that legal? So I don't know. What are your guys' responses to this idea that maybe Biden is looking too forward as much as we need to be?
I agree. I feel like there's a really valid point in the danger of not looking back and scrutinizing, right? There's still this thing where like, I don't understand how they can continue to spread the big lie. Like at what point do we just say factually people understand this is truth and this is not? And how do we communicate that? Because it's up for debate and it's just obviously become such a mess and so confusing that the fact. And they tried to destroy USPS before the election so that people couldn't vote, mail in their votes. And then they cried about election fraud. And it was like, you're going to say whatever and it's working. And they've ostracized, Cheney and anybody who wanted to hold him accountable. And now we're just headed back in the same direction. It's very frightening. I don't have a joke there, guys. So I'll try to come up with one.
Workshop that while we discuss.
They've said a lot of crazy things about Biden. Their attempt to pitch him as some sort of like Chinese Stalin or something. A lot that they say about him is crazy. But one of the craziest things they said was that if he becomes president, he's going to wage war against the Republicans, locking them up, No, Biden would never do that. The fact that he's looking forward, not looking back, I find to be the least surprising thing in politics. Mm-hmm. Obama, was a little bit less of a known quantity in that area. He was willing to investigate some people he shouldn't have been, journalists and things like that. But Biden's not going to do that. He should. I don't like that presidents have literally no reason to believe that no matter what they do, they will ever spend a day in jail. You can do anything. You can nuke cities. You can perpetuate genocides. You can overthrow governments. You can
lie about a global pandemic.
You can lie about a global pandemic, letting hundreds of thousands die. You can drone strike Americans. You can do anything you want. Yeah. Why? It's a wonder they don't do more illegal stuff while they're in office. They do a lot, to be fair. And in Trump's defense, he's very, very lazy as well as corrupt. So he had to balance those two things. But the thing is, while in general terms, I would love to see a U.S. president behind bars as a warning to not just future presidents, but future senators and representatives, governors, Supreme Court justices, and all that. I also know that literally anything they investigate Trump on, no matter how legitimate, no matter how backed up by the evidence, is going to be greeted by 35% of the population as the most obviously fraudulent thing that's ever existed.
Sure.
So, but it seems like a moot point because Biden ain't going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It is. But I'm scared. Like, I am of two minds. Initially, I feel like these bold plans that he's, whether it's the infrastructure bill or the, family plan, or like the actual relief bill, the COVID relief bill, all these things are excellent. I'm so glad he's getting to work because I'm not someone who thinks that like 2022 is definitely going to swing towards Republicans. I think that I don't know if it will, especially if Biden's able to deliver. He's already delivered on the vaccines and he's trying to even more. If he's able to deliver on some of these other pieces, we'll see. But that is why I'm scared, because I think the narrative, I think what Emily is saying is absolutely right on, which is like, he doesn't even take the opportunity during, an address to a joint session that is publicized. It wasn't like, the State of the Union, I guess, but it really was, to be like, I won. Like, hands down,
Let me
I
clear something
won.
up. Yeah.
Let me count the ways that I won.
Yeah.
When he should absolutely claim that. It won't sound petty. I know it feels like it sounds petty because of course you won, and like, why like keep on saying it, but people need to hear that. And then the other thing people need to hear, and he sort of got close to this when he talked about, white supremacy is terrorism, but he's like, I don't believe in the language of terrorism, but I absolutely think there needs to be a narrative of what happened on January 6th was un-American. I'm going to say it over and over and over again. Like, how many times do you want to hear it? I got all those ways.
Right.
Because otherwise we're losing the thread. Otherwise it's good that we're doing stuff, but it's almost like we just have to move forward and pretend, like your family member didn't say that really weird thing about QAnon or what, like just keep eating our dinner, and like,
right. To what end in 4 years? Right.
Exactly.
And he's boldly saying he's going to do it, run in 2024. And there's this support. It's just the strangest thing where we're like, didn't we all see that? Were we all watching what happened? And 70% of Republicans are back on board.
Totally. And interestingly, and this is where my stupid optimism, and I think John and I differ, where John's more of the pessimist and I'm like, but wait a minute. I think more people are identifying as independents. Supposedly something like 70% of independents believe that Biden did legitimately win the election. And I think folks would rather be categorized as independents than Republicans. So it's like we keep on seeing these numbers, but I'm not really sure how many Republicans are left.
Thank you for this point. This is the most refreshing thing I've heard in a week.
I mean, I could be totally wrong, but like that is I think especially after January 6th, I'm not sure. I think a lot of them have fled. But on that, I want to just show this one last thing that he says in this interview, which is essentially he's concerned that when it comes to January 6th, we were just going to do like mopes and dopes investigation. So just arrest people, make a ton of trespass and assault cases against them who broke into the Capitol, and then not go after the higher ups. He says, if this were a drug case, you did a sweep of everybody selling drugs on the streets, and then you didn't bother to look up at who was funding the operation, who the kingpins were, how it was being structured and managed. You wouldn't be doing your job as a prosecutor. That's the point I wanted to make. If in the course of developing that, they find more evidence that they could think beyond a reasonable doubt, convict people who were part of incitement for it, they'll have to make that call, and I wouldn't rule it out. So that's about the investigatory committee. There's sort of a 9/11 style commission going on right now. Unclear where that's at, but looking back on what happened on January 6th. Look, there are sitting representatives. Forget Ted Cruz and Josh Hawley. There are representatives who planned this event with like these right-wing activists, Mo Brooks, Congressman Paul Gosar, Congressman Andy Biggs. These guys all planned the rally, the Stop the Steal rally. Like they knew what was going to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. They should be held accountable, and you wish that they could. And we're like, what are we doing? I feel like the question of like, yes, Obama's actions of not looking back did empower the GOP because they're, snakes and opportunistic and will use that to their advantage to get, more bold. And then on the other hand, the insurrectionists on January 6th, like, they don't know history before 2008. So they were just, one has nothing to do with the other. They were just ready to do it knowing
but that's
nothing.
the Democrats' failure to be like, if you're not constantly talking about Bush as a Democrat, you fucking suck. I'm sorry. But like, if I were in office, I mean, I'm not going to be, but I'd be like, I would talk about Bush all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Who put us in this debt? Or you want to talk about debt? Let's talk about $3 trillion down the drain in the Middle East, Like, who put us here? Let's never forget, because Republicans are run from the Bush legacy like, rats in a flood. Like, they do not want to touch that legacy. They don't even want to say that he was part of their party. He fucking was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important. I think the rhetoric, I think an investigation is important for, posterity. I don't think anything they find is going to convince anyone. 30% of the country still thinks that it was Antifa that came and Trump talked to them and said he would go with them and then said that they were great and beautiful and he loves them, but it was Antifa the whole time. So why is he complimenting them? But I think the most important thing that the Democrats can do to fight back against not only the insanity, but the electoral consequences of it, which is the big lie is bad if you care about reality, but it's worse when it leads to legislation that makes it harder for people to vote. So the most important thing they can do is to pass HR 1. And to do that, they're probably going to have to get rid of the filibuster. So that is what they can and should do. And so far, they're not willing to do that. So I do have an issue with Biden not really calling out and recognizing what the right is. But I also mad at him for not recognizing those who are aiding the right, because the Democrats have the numbers if they choose to use it. But in the same way that he didn't really call them out in that address, he also didn't call out Kristen Sinema or Joe Manchin. He didn't identify them as the ones who were stopping them from passing this must-pass legislation. So I think that there's a lot of cowardice to go around.
It's like, I think he wants to sail under the radar without having a unifying and strong, like, offensive message, like going on the offense, like a vision. I think it's just like, we're going to do these things versus like, no. Here's the worldview. And this is what, and we're going to talk about Captain America, but like, these are our values,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Interestingly, he kind of gets there on foreign policy. Like, he's super saber rattly with China and sometimes Russia. But then he has this he keeps on saying democracy in a way that doesn't feel like we're invading a second world country in Central America. Democracy. Like, it feels like, no. As opposed to authoritarianism. He doesn't say as opposed to communism. He doesn't say as opposed to socialism. It's as opposed to authoritarianism. And like, I like that. And like, I want more of that,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. My dad always says, I think it's a quote from somewhere, but he's like, Democrats go for the capillary, where Republicans go for the jugular. And that's always going to be the issue politically.
Where's the capillary? Here?
I think
All
it's
over.
just like a little,
just like a small, like a versus.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. They will politically always, right, and grab power and do things like, forget that they denied Obama's opportunity to appoint a Supreme Court justice, 8 months before the election, and then rush one in and act like that didn't happen, or how dare we even think that we could stop them from doing that when they did. And it's like, they will just keep doing it. They will just take those shark bites. And that is not what
it's very like, if you guys know anyone who's got a small dog and they're like, oh my God, they're all, stop begging for food. Here. Right.
Right.
Stop begging. And there's like, why do you think it's begging?
That's well said.
I just want to shout out Chris B in the comments said maybe the Women's March should have been the storming of the Capitol. Dude, I don't disagree with that. Let me just say, I obviously do not think that anyone should have stormed the Capitol, but every time I watch that footage, I'm always like, I would have been shot instantly, like,
In the face. Like,
in the face,
in the
many
vagina,
times.
the face. Yeah.
Mhm.
Just dogs, everything, like all kinds of non-lethal weapons. They would have made sure like all of us were good and dead 10 times over. Like it boggles my mind.
Yep.
And yet I was at, look, DC, the Women's March was really moving. I've never seen a protest that big. And I've been in like February 15th against the Iraq War in New York. That was huge. Like 1 million people on the streets. This was gigantic. And if we had all camped out, sat in, like surrounded a building, like something a little bit more, you can be militant without being violent. And that's something I firmly believe. So like, what is it? I don't disagree with you, Chris. Hey, thanks so much for watching the Bitchuation Room podcast live stream. And while you're here, why don't you just subscribe to this channel? I promise it'll be good. Promise.